Hi, this is Rachel from the Dotting Center. In today's video, we're going to revisit a technique we did 3 years ago, brush embroidery. We have done a variety of different ornaments together using our paint bottles, but this time we're adding more color. Well, that was dramatic. It's an incredibly fun way to use paint bottles and brushes to turn weird-looking smears of paint into luscious, textured petals. In this video, I'll show you step-by-step how you can use this technique to make your own hand-painted floral Christmas ornaments. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe to my channel. And if you are ready to add some new ornaments to your tree this year, stay tuned. I think you're really gonna like this. I know that I did. For this project, I'm using this 4-inch black ornament that I found at Michael's. I'll leave the link below. Now this is going to be a textured paint project. So we're going to be using multi-surface paints, which are thicker and tend to show brush strokes, which is what we want. I've found that most multi-surface paints are good to go straight from the bottle, and these are just a variety of brands that work. So Martha Stewart, Folk Art, Arteza, even Deco Art. I mean, as long as it's multi-surface, it's a good chance that it's just the right consistency. You'll also need a chalk pencil and then a variety of different brushes that you like to use. I picked these just because the bristles are soft, but they're also strong, and you would base your brush choice on the type of flower that you're going to paint. This book is insane. I'll list it down below. This is such a great reference for artists. It is actually color-coded, so each section will show you different flowers in that particular color. So if you're looking for a white flower, you go to the white section. It's just very easy. I was inspired by this. This is the anemone flower. So beautiful. I thought it was a perfect flower to give it a shot. It had nice color variation, and I just really wanted to paint the stamen in the center. I just think that looks super cool. So step 1, you want to sketch out your composition. So using the photograph, just kind of make these big shapes of where you think you want your flowers to go and kind of try and arrange them in a way that fills the space nicely. I wanted some flowers to be facing forward and some flowers to be facing upward and to the side. I think that just adds a little bit of variety. And then just pay attention to the outlines of the petals, because that's where you're going to be placing your paint. So here is my final sketch. It's kind of rough, but you get the idea. You just kind of want a basic plan for what you're going to do, because really most of the magic happens with the paint, which is what we're going to do next. Now when I start, I like to start with the least important flower first, so I can kind of get my technique chops down. I'm going to start with the 2 white flowers on the top and the right side. What you want to do is just basically pipe on a thick outline of paint and go thicker than what you might imagine you need. Outline the petals in a way that makes it easy for when you have your brush, you can just dip it in the edge and then pull it towards the center of the flower. So looking at the picture, there are hints of green and pink in the petals. So what you want to do is just place color in a just random location on the petal. It just depends on where you want the colors to show up. Here I'm going to place a tiny bit of the pink just in random locations where I want that pink to show up. So when you lay down this color, just pay attention to the volume of paint. The most amount of paint will win as far as what colors shows up most. So the technique is you take your brush, you dip it in the color, and then you gently pull that paint towards the center of the flower. I am using a dry brush technique. So whenever my brush gets loaded with too much paint, I wipe the brush off and dry off the bristles so that they're fresh each time. So part of the technique is leaving a good mass of paint on the edges of the petals so that they kind of pop out on the edges of the petals. I think that looks so nice. So just use a minimal amount of paint on the tip of your brush. One thing to keep in mind as you do this technique is to really just don't overwork the paint. You might have a tendency, like I did, to blend and try and overwork the petal shapes, but I think that this technique looks best when you leave it loose and flowy and don't try and work it too hard. I think that the paint will do its job. However, this technique is so forgiving, so if you mess up, don't worry. You can always add more paint and push it around in a different way and make it work for you. You can just, as long as the paint is still wet, it can be adjusted, no worries. It's gonna look great. So now we're moving on to this top flower, and you can see that the lines that I'm using on the edges of the petal have ridges, and they're not perfect lines, and that is because these petals kind of look like that. They have a nice ruffly, delicate edge. Again, the volume of the paint wins. So right here, this is going to be mostly a white flower with kind of tints of green and pink. Also, this green is Arteza Color Shift green. It's metallic. I love how the metallic paints mix with matte paints and, just standard opaque paints. It gives it an interesting shine to it that I really, really enjoy. I think that came out pretty cool. So I don't know about you, but during the holidays, I get crazy for sparkle and glitter and, just go nuts decorating. But this project, I think, looked better the more restrained that I tried to be. It's hard for me because I really want to go extra with this, but using only one metallic color. Now you can see, looking at that just looks like a mess, honey. How the heck are we going to make that work? That just looks terrible. You just got to step back. You got to trust the process. The brush is going to do all the work for you. Know that really the magic happens on the tips of the bristles. That's it. As long as you get the direction of the petal right, it's kind of the randomness of this that makes it so much fun. You just don't know how it's going to turn out. I just love it. It's very, very enjoyable. As you're working, it's helpful to move your object so that you can pull the brush the same way each time. The muscle memory is just better if you only have to drag your brush one direction. So if you are right-handed, you would make sure that you're pulling towards your right hand, and if you're left-handed, you would just pull towards your left hand. Now here I noticed I wanted a little bit more pink, so you can add this extra color as long as the paint is still wet. And remember just to paint loose strokes. You can also adjust the size of your brush, the hardness of the bristle that you use. Now see, that I think looks so cool. Now once you get your paint looking right, know that there are going to be layers on top. You want to make sure that you put it aside, let it dry. And now we're going to work on that red flower right in the front. Now when I started making this petal shape, I noticed that it was a little too hard to push the paint out of that tip. So I'm going to change that out for a wider gauge tip. This one will allow the paint to really pipe out in a much thicker volume than the previous tip. That other tip was too small and it's really for details. The wider gauge just allows a lot more paint to come out of the tip, and it makes this, when you need a high volume of paint, this is the kind of tip that you want to use. So again, the volume of paint will win out as far as what color shows up the most. So we want to make sure that this flower has a majority of the volume being pink. But we also want to have other colors showing through, so we're going to add some whites and some greens along with the pink. So again, we're going to add variation by placing dots of paint on the petal shapes in just various locations. And this is just the comedy of this technique right here. I cannot get this section to look anything but a disaster. It's a craftastrophe the way it looks, and then once you hit the brush and you move that paint around, it starts to come together, but you have to trust the process. Again, wipe your brush off, make sure that you're using a dry brush in between petals, and then pull that paint where you want it to go. So if you are a subscriber to my channel, first of all, thank you. I love that you have already subscribed. And because of the nature of this channel, you know that we don't usually do this technique. This is a dotting channel, and we create art here that is made mostly out of dots. And the technique is very different. The mindset is very different than brush painting. So this technique is very loose, and you have less control over your paint than you do with dotting. And I would love to open up a discussion down in the comments. For those of you who are used to dot painting and you like to experiment and try new techniques, let me know in the comments. Do you like to mix it up, or do you mostly just stick with dotting? I'm curious. Or maybe you are one of those people who are new to this channel and you just kind of stumbled upon this video because you're used to floral painting or brush embroidery, or you're just curious about this technique. I am curious what kind of artist you are, so let us know in the comments. So this is where I landed for the flowers. Now we're going to work on those leaves and the stems. So of all the paint colors that I'm using today, this one really gets me. I love it. It's Folk Art Forest Moss, and this shade of green just does something for me. I love it. And these leaf shapes are really interesting. They're wispy and loose and curly, very frilly looking. And now I've just decided to add a 4-petaled white flower in a couple of locations just to fill out the space. It's very easy to do. You take a small brush and you just blend that dot towards the center, creating a petal. And these are good space fillers wherever you need something. You can just add a tiny little flower. Now the leaves on the bottom looked a little too blobby for me, so I used a dry brush and just scooped out some of the paint to make it look a little more frilly. Now notice some of that pink bled into that leaf, and I'm super okay with that. I think it adds to the painterliness of it. Is painterliness a word? Why, yes it is. Fantastic. Speaking of fantastic things, I'm using my silicone tool to remove most of my mess up leaf down at the bottom. It was just too much of a blob, and so I just had to remove some of that paint, and that's the easiest way to do it. Those silicone tools are amazing. So the petals on this pink flower had white in the center right before the stamen shows up. So I decided to try this fan brush, but it ended up being too wide and it was a little clunky, and I should have used a different brush. But the cool thing about this technique is it really is all about the brush. Try what you've got and see what works. Now we're going to paint the black stamen on the inside of each of these flowers. Everything has dried. The paint has dried. And now we're going to come in and use some dots. Hey, this is like my comfort zone. Now, this is not folk art color shift black like that comes straight out of the bottle. This is a very specific blend that I mixed with some gel medium to make it extra thick. I did this for a project a few years back, my waffle cone sundae egg. I needed a fudge-like consistency for my sundae egg, and this is still one of my favorite projects that we've done on YouTube. This was so much of a blast, but that was 3 years ago, and this paint is still working for me in that bottle. So, okay, so now we're about to have some fun. So we did all those tiny little seed-like dots, and now we're going to switch out that smaller detailed tip for the larger gauge cone tip. This has a wider hole in the top, so it's going to allow for a nice, big, huge dot right in the center. And this is super satisfying, so let's watch. Whoa, right? Fun. We get to make 2 more. It's so great. So you can see this paint is thick. It is thick and it will dry thick because of the gel medium that I added to it. If you're familiar with folk art color shift paint, it does not stand up like this without adding a medium to it. But I'm telling you, this mix is gorgeous. I use it all the time. It's nice to have a nice thick black at the ready. Look at that. And it's going to dry just like that. Okay, so now with that last dot added, this is the final painting. We're just going to let that dry. Now, because this paint is extra thick, I let it dry overnight just to ensure that the paint is 100% dry. And then you just take a damp, wet cloth and wipe this over the surface just to remove any chalk lines that might show up. Anything underneath the paint is locked in for good and you won't be able to see it. No one will know. Now this is a Christmas ornament, so I want to take extra precautions just to protect that paint because this is going to be packed and unpacked and kept with other ornaments, and you just want to protect the paint as much as you can. So I'm using a Liquitex high gloss varnish for the flowers and the leaves, and I'm avoiding any of that beautiful matte black background as I like that contrast between the shiny flowers and the matte black. So here's how it turned out. What do you guys think? Did you like this project? I hope you did. We're gonna do this again. I already have my second one already planned out. I'm just so super crazy for this. I can't wait to do this one. Well, hey, if you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And as always, you can visit me over at thedottingcenter.com for any kind of dotting supplies or even now original art. Thank you so much for watching and go ahead and have yourself a great day. I'll see you next time. Bye.